wants to go first? Is it me? Because I'm already talking. Uh,
Sure.
okay, so my name is Katrina. I work as actually a TikTok coach. So I teach businesses how to use TikTok and how to make money. And some of my like interests, I'm a shameless pop girly. I listen to a lot of pop music, but then also like I love kind of like any music except for country. And some of my favorite like media to consume is like anime movies and TV shows. So
My name is Molly. I'm a non-binary, like online content creator. I do a lot of that. My main job, I actually work at a cocktail bar, despite the fact that I am sober. But yeah, I work at a cocktail bar as my main job. But I also do ad work for certain companies, and I also do promotional work online as well. And in my spare time, I'm an artist. I like painting, photography, sketching, things like that. And then I'm an amateur skateboarder, meaning I just started skateboarding, and I'm very bad at it. So that's my new hobby of the month.
I guess tying into that, what are your guys' like personal experiences with BPD and like kind of strong lessons you've learned from all of that, like lessons you've learned from DBT, lessons you've learned from being in rehab, general mental health lessons that you guys have learned throughout your experiences.
when I was younger, a lot of my like I know that obviously you can't be diagnosed until you're 18, but I was younger, like I was definitely showing a lot of the anger symptoms. Like I was probably 8 or 10 years old and punching holes in walls like frequently. And you know, like I just remember one time my mom's bipolar, so she was having her own issues at the time. But I just remember one time that she was just in the house going, "This is not normal. This is not normal." And she was talking about, my levels of anger and the way that I would fight with my brother and stuff like that. As soon as I was able to move away from my family, though, like and be independent and be on my own, I was actually I've been able to have a way better control of my mental illness. Um, and stuff like that. So, like, being able to kind of control it is something that's probably new. I've only been diagnosed officially for about a year. So I always was wondering kind of like why I have these reactions. I had gone to my doctor previously and said, like, my mom's bipolar. I think I might be bipolar. There's something, because this isn't just, my ADHD and anxiety anymore. Um, and so what happened was I went through actually an employment agency that was basically through the Canadian government was giving us assessments. So I got my assessment, and that was when they told me, like, you have BPD, and everything just clicked. And I was like, that explains so much reckless behavior when I was 18, going out and drinking and walking the neighborhood and, doing like some substances and stuff like that. So it was definitely like a lot of like anger and no impulse control when I was younger. I got a little bit angry yesterday because my dad mentioned something to me about like my abusive ex, and I started to get so overwhelmed in the car, and like my face was red. My dad and my brother are sitting there, and I'm just like getting super overwhelmed, and like the things that are coming out of my mouth are just hate statements and just vile. And today I'm sitting here and I think about it, and I'm like, I'm still annoyed, but in that moment, like my heart was just pounding and my face was getting full of blood, and it's such an instant fiery reaction.
That's the anger I find in BPD. It's just like happens, it's just so quick, and then you're like up here, and then you have to figure out how to get back down from that point on.
Yeah, it takes so much time to get back down too. I feel like you're like, like you get angry so quick, but then coming down is not that quick. It's never that quick. And you're like, okay, now I need a few hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think one of my biggest signs that they said to me was like one of the biggest like red flags that I probably had BPD was actually that I was losing my jobs every 8 months. So I was getting a job. It was the best job on earth for the first 3 months. I was the best employee. And then all of a sudden one day, like 6 or 8 months in, I'm making, I'm saying I would rather, unalive than go to work.
Yeah.
And then I'm emailing in saying, I'm not coming into work anymore. I quit effective immediately. Bye. Or I'm no showing. And it was so many jobs. It was every job I ever had. And they were like, okay, like this is very common with this illness. So
definitely relate to that. How many jobs I've been like, I'm done with this job. I'm never going back.
like I can't think of a single job. Maybe the one job that I actually left in a good manner was because there was a global pandemic and they shut down forever.
Well, for me, I definitely showed signs of BPD at a very young age as well. When I was probably around 12 years old, my first symptoms, a lot of it was just like deep depression. I remember being like 12 years old, like being very suicidal. And I didn't understand it, and I didn't really even have the words to know I was depressed. I was just look at other kids and be like, I'm not happy like them. And I definitely lived in a very traumatic kind of household where it's like, it caused me to go into very mental lows. And there was a lot of arguing in my house as well. And I think that's where my rage started definitely as well, where I had to defend myself. I had to fight back. But then it became harder to like come down from those things, or I would have full-blown panic attacks, or I just found that I couldn't control my emotions. And like even growing up, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, you're a crybaby, you're oversensitive, you're over-emotional, you're being a brat, you're like I don't know the word exactly. You're selfish." That was a big one, you know. And these are all words that my parents used against me when I'm just someone that's struggling to understand my emotions. And definitely in my teen years, it got out of control. Like I couldn't even like what I felt beforehand was so small in comparison. My teen years, I definitely think my BPD was the most heightened. And the same thing is like a lot of times you can't get a diagnosis until you are 18 years old. So always in my chart they suspected personality disorders and things like that. I was lucky enough that I've been in therapy since I was 12 because of my family and CPS and things like that. I was able to access therapy at a young age. And I did trauma-based therapy, I did exposure therapy, I did CBT therapy. And some were beneficial for sure. Exposure therapy was really good for my trauma. But as a teenager is when my impulse control went out the window, where I started acting out, kind of as a way of trying to get my dad's attention because he was very non-attentive, you know, sometimes. So I just remember breaking into show homes or going out at night or doing whatever substances I could get my hands on. And definitely for a teenager, I was doing things that like, while teenagers are known for being impulsive, it was just beyond that. And yeah, I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 20 years old. I didn't even know what BPD was until a year before I got diagnosed, where a friend was talking about her borderline, and I related. I was like, everything she said made sense because there's always this part of my head where I had a diagnosis of PTSD and depression and a general anxiety disorder, but it never fit for me. It didn't make sense to me. I was like, I'm not that anxious of a person. It's moments, and I'm like, I'm depressed, but not like that. And I'm like, it's this fighting every day of like getting up in the morning and then going through those emotions. And it was not until I was 20 and I got hospitalized actually through my university, where I was in university for visual art, and it hit my third year and I just mentally broke. I was in a really bad relationship, very toxic, abusive relationship, on top of being in school full time, along with working on top of that. And I just completely broke. And I ended up in the hospital, and that's where I got my diagnosis because they said it's not normal to get to like a suicidal point for things that most people are able to manage. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't control things. And a lot of it did have to do with my environment. And I think that's a big thing with BPD is environment and finding your space and finding the right people to be understanding of it. Well, many people can be good people. Not every person can be a good fit for you with your BPD, I find. So over time, I found the right people. I went into addiction therapy about 2 years ago. And I'm officially sober for 100 days now. So that's great. Well, it's like 108 days, I think, today. But sobriety was also one of the biggest changes in my treatment. Like I do things like I still smoke weed and that, but I was doing a lot of other substances and drinking, and I talk a lot about it on my TikTok, so I'm very open about it. But I think that was one of the catalyst points where it really switched for me because I started to care for myself the moment I chose to, you know, sort those things. So that's a bit about my treatment and my BPD experience. I definitely feel more stable now. I was in a million unstable relationships, and I'm definitely not perfect still, but I'm definitely in a much healthier point, and the people around me can see that as well.
Have you guys watched BoJack? Because I know like that's the most like famous, I guess, BPD character
I
on
definitely
screen.
watched it. I think it's a really good example of like an untreated BPD person. You know what I mean? I think that's a big misconception where people will watch it. I think a lot of teenagers as well will watch it and be like, "This is what BPD is. This is what I'm gonna be like. I'm doomed." You know what I mean? But like watching it from a person that did treatment, I was like, that was the route I was on. You know, like I could see where I was going in that. Like same thing where every character is different, every person is different. We're responsible, but we are always inherently responsible for our actions and things like that. But he's a perfect example of someone that's never accountable for himself or his actions and doesn't have any treatment. And I think that's like it's kind of like a warning, you know what I mean? To be like you can't just wait to the end to fix it all when everything is, you know. But I do love that show. I think it's very emotional. I relate more to actually what is her name? I can't remember.
Is it the writer?
No, the other girl.
The cat?
The girl that like became a pop star. Can't remember her name.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Sarah Jean.
Sarah Lynn. Sarah Lynn.
I believe Sarah Lynn also has BPD. I think she's like another example of someone that like was traumatized very young by a child after that.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it, since I've seen BoJack, but I definitely there's some really killer jokes in there. And like I find that like I really like that actually on TikTok you find a lot of audios that are like BoJack stuff, and you can kind of use it to bring up the
Yeah.
conversation and talk about it. So there
Yeah.
are some like really relatable parts, but I do find that I relate more to other characters than I
Yeah.
do to BoJack, because I have really put in that work,
Yeah.
that personal work to not to not be like BoJack. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching BoJack for the first time. I was like, oh, some of these things I do. So that was a kind of really shocking experience. So it's great to know that, like, again, like that's what a person with untreated BPD is like, and like there's obviously change. And Molly, you had something to say, I think.
Oh,
Good.
I agree. Like the TikTok sounds as well. Like it is a really like the way they describe how he feels is very accurate to the experience. Like even that one episode where he wakes up and you hear his internal monologue of like him waking up, and it's a popular TikTok audio as well. But it's like him looking in the mirror being like, I'm a piece of shit, and then it's like that monologue in your head of just like angry thoughts at you. Where sometimes you do wake up and it's literally your brain consistently telling you negative thoughts towards yourself, everything around you. But yeah, I think there's definitely some really good lessons within that show, and but at the same time, I think people should always like take everything with a grain of salt. He is one singular example of what a person could look like with BPD, and he definitely has some other traits in there when it comes to like his own ego and things like that. But yeah, I do like the show. Even like all the ways they show other people's mental health problems as well, like the writer's depression. Even that, I relate to that deeply. Like that deep sadness she felt, along with her trauma as well. Where I think she says something where it's like the trauma meant nothing when she's trying to write a book about her trauma and she can't, and then she's like, it can't mean nothing. It can't mean nothing. I just remember like bawling my eyes out of the scene. So it's like it is that feeling a lot of the time where it's like this all happened to me for no reason, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good show.
Okay, this is again really like a quick swerve on topic, but we kind of mentioned FP's favorite persons just now. Lots of, I guess, this is especially in my case, like my TikTok for you page, so many people are like, oh, I have an FP, but like it just seems like it's a basic normal crush. So what are kind of the misconceptions people have with FPs, and like how is that different from like just someone's like normal crushes, normal love, all that? And if you have any personal experience you'd be comfortable sharing, that'd be great.
I definitely relate to the favorite person. I think there is a lot of misconceptions about what a favorite person is, and when people hear that, I think like there's a lot of people that can cling on to it and being like, maybe I have BPD because I'm really obsessed with this person, I really like this person. But FP is like a very complicated relationship where you're essentially like attaching yourself to someone in a way that, while you do love them, but you love them in a way that you love them heavier than other people. It is kind of a form of an obsession with someone, but it's even more than that. Like your emotions are dependent on that person a lot of the time. How they react to you, how they interact with you throughout the day can make your day good or make your day bad. I don't feel like I've always in my life had favorite persons. There is points in my life where I kind of don't have one. Even now, I currently do have someone I consider that, but I think it has to do with like a lot of therapy and stuff can help you with those kind of relationships because they're very complicated and can be very destructive, and that you're willing to do literally anything to make sure this person doesn't leave, which often makes them want to leave. And I've had ones that are very unhealthy, and that's another thing as well. A lot of times, favorite persons can be resemblance of people in our past, and that's why we very much attach to them, looking for that validation that we didn't get or the love that we didn't get. I had one in high school, and it lasted 7 years. It was a very toxic kind of relationship that I had with this person, and he had BPD as well, so we were both very attached to each other. But it was definitely very unhealthy. But it's very hard to disattach yourself from those people. Like you think about them all the time when they're not interacting with you. I remember if they would like block me or I'd be out of contact with them, like my whole world felt like it was ending. And I think that's the difference. Is like yes, when you go through a breakup, for anyone, it's a very difficult experience. But for someone with BPD, a breakup can feel like you're literally like it hurts, you know, in a physical way, in a mental way, in a way that's like hard to explain to other people. Where some people are like, oh, I get so depressed when I go through a breakup. Where it's like, yeah, I can get suicidal or hospitalized in those kind of states of breakups, especially. Now I'm good. I haven't been in a hospital for about a year now, which is good. But definitely controlling those relationships can be good. But a lot of people do think they're like he's like, oh, you're just in love with someone, you're obsessed with someone, but I think it's like very deeper than that, and it's more of a, I don't know, intertwined connection that can be very dangerous. Yeah.
I think for me, the last time I had I mean, okay, I would say I currently do have an FP, like a favorite person, and it's probably my best friend who's in the other room, and like I think because we've been friends for like over 10 years, but I think when I was younger, like when I was around 18 years old, I was not a good friend. I was very much at the point of like anything that, my best friend does, I'm going to get upset if it's not with me, or,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then like I think for me it was really in high school was my first like kind of FP, was my very best friend. The irony being that my FP now, who's in the other room, my original FP was her sister. So like we were in the same grade, and like we were attached. I don't know if she has BPD or anything. I can't speculate on her mental health. I know she's got her own diagnosis and stuff like that, but we were just attached at the hip. We were always together. We both grew up in those traumatic households. And so we just kind of like trauma bonded our way into being each other's favorite person. And it was very toxic. Like we were on MSN Instant Messenger fighting almost every day because I went and hung out with someone else, or she got a boyfriend I didn't like. And it was very much like we might as well have been dating each other because how much we were fighting. Like it was like, it was really bad. And then the way that it ended, it ended with us shouting at the top of our lungs at each other, and we stopped being friends for a long time. We reconnected and then stopped being friends again over very similar issues. And then just this last summer, she wanted to reconnect again. And what happened was she was updating me on all this like kind of life drama stuff. And it was bringing up my past trauma because she was talking about like an abusive relationship, and it was bringing up my past abusive relationship and making me kind of like re-experience the things that I had just gotten away from. And so I ended up just doing my usual BPD thing and blocking her on every platform physically possible. But I would say that like my relationship with Alyssa, who is currently like my favorite person, it was not super healthy for either of us when we were younger. But now I definitely don't feel like I need to know what she's doing all the time. I don't feel like she needs to respond to me like this or she hates me. I definitely we have a lot more respect for each other, which I think comes with time and with knowing each other, and also with working through every disagreement we've ever had, which is hard to find because I can't say I've had a lot of long friendships like that in my life. So
I find finding someone that can like work through problems is like such a huge thing. Someone that is a good communicator and can like work through issues, because a lot of my friendships too have ended that way, or relationships where it's like they just don't want to have a conversation, or they don't want to like try to understand where my reactions come from. And it just comes from a lot of like understanding. Like the people that have stayed in my life are the ones that are willing to be like, okay, we had an argument, let's talk about it, instead of just being like, oh, you're too much. But I definitely had FP friends as well. Definitely those like close connections in high school, especially, where it's like I just need to know what my friend is doing at all times. I'm mad if I'm not invited to anything. Like,
how are you hanging out with them after school instead of me?
Yeah, it's like those are like the early signs of like that fear of abandonment, where it's like, how dare anyone hang out with me? Even with my favorite person, it was like that a lot. Where now, like my FP, we have a very healthy relationship, but in the beginning of our relationship, where we were very toxic towards each other. We kind of feed off of each other's like. I'd be very attached, he'd be very detached, and now I'm at a point where we've become good friends. He was a partner of mine before, but we found we were much healthier as friends. But I can still have that relationship where we were both willing to communicate and engage with each other. And now instead of freaking out every time I'm not messaged every few hours, I can like go a whole day or a few days without having to talk to this person or needing those things. So I think with a lot of work, you can like grow healthier relationships with.
Absolutely agree.
I think it's really good to remember too, like any relationship, I think for people with BPD, that can feel very heavy when someone leaves their life. But like as the older I go, like my friends are constantly changing. The people that are in my life are constantly changing because we're constantly changing. Like the people that fit your life at one point might not fit your life at another point. And I find you shouldn't always take it personally, because sometimes it just has to do with their incapabilities or their just clashing of personalities, where someone will always leave your life, but even in the times where you feel like you have no one, people will come into your life. It just takes time, like how many friendships and friend groups that have blown up in my face over the years. Especially being a person with BPD, I find you get that stigma in the friend group, or you get that like kind of target as being the mentally unwell person, the person that has those reactions. But the more I've healed, the more I've been able to even reconnect with people that I've like had a whole love with. Like all of my friends that I have now, I've at least been in one scream match with at one point in my life. But it's just about those people that are willing to understand. But it also takes a lot of like self-awareness too, of how you treat people and how you interact with people and how you can like better connect and stay connected with people.
I've actually really lucked out, and I'm going to say lucked out. 2 out of 3 of my best friends are also diagnosed with BPD.
So that helps.
They really understand when I'm like, when, I can text them and say, I am so upset. It feels like my heart has dropped out of my chest, and they literally understand that feeling because they have felt it themselves. And that to me is like very helpful. I think knowing other people with BPD is helpful, even if they're not people you talk to all the time, just someone that you can talk to and say like, hey, I am experiencing this symptom and it sucks. you know,
And they can just get it.
and they
Yeah.
say, yes, I hear you, you know.
And even that, a
So
lot of my closest friends do have BPD. That does
yeah,
help. Like, it helps more than anything because, like, when you flip out or something, they can understand exactly where you're coming from. Where the person without BPD, they're like, "Why would you react that way? I couldn't possibly understand that." Where like some fights I've been in, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, BPD moment," and they're like, "I get it. You know, it's fine." But even my like one of my closest best friends, her boyfriend has BPD, so it's things like that where it's like someone that can just like have empathy or understand the struggle, or have different but similar mental health struggles that can like be
yeah,
sympathetic towards your reaction sometimes.
So, like you said that most of your friends have BPD. I find that most of my friends are just neurodivergent in general. Like some people have like I think most of my friends have autism.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that something you guys have found? Because I don't know, like
Definitely. I think people with BPD are actually neurodivergent in itself, you know? So I find like I have a lot of friends with autism or ADHD or things like that because there's certain ways, especially with ADHD, there's very similar ways a person with BPD and ADHD experience things. So I find like any neurodiversity, it becomes that kind of like sense of community and that like it's hard for a BPD person just as much as someone with autism, or not just as much, but they both struggle with social interaction, with holding relationships, with communication. So I feel like there's that sense of community, you know?
yes, birds of a feather, you know.
Yeah.
They so like all my friends have something. It's like my boyfriend, I think like he hasn't been diagnosed and we're still working on the process of getting him diagnosed, but he bounces his leg way too much for that to not be some sort of ADHD.
Yeah.
He's got, you know, so many of the symptoms that I know are ADHD because I am also like I also have comorbidities. So I have ADHD, BPD, PTSD, and like a couple of learning disabilities as well. And every single one of my friends either has ADHD, autism, you know, BPD themselves, bipolar, any combination.
Yeah.
And it really is like we really understand each other better than, you know, I understand someone who's like able to just get up in the morning and do things
Yeah.
and enjoy it. Like, you know, there's especially with the social stuff because it's like a lot of us can relate to the fact that it's hard to make friends or like hard to understand even social cues sometimes. So
Yeah.
it's just easier to be around, I think, people whose brains work the same way that yours do.
Yeah. For sure.
but just to wrap it up, do you guys want to plug your social medias or just anything you guys have been doing, mental health advocacy, or just outside of like with work and stuff? Any successes, achievements? Just yeah, just bring it all up.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow my BPD content on TikTok. My name is Katrina Andreessen. My username is just my name. And then if you, I mean, want tips for growing your TikTok platform, you can follow the Social Besties, which is my business. So that's pretty much what I got.
Very cool. I don't have too much to plug. Same thing. All my social media is DamagedxDolly, my little fancy name online.
I'm coming to find you
Yeah.
right now.
I love it. But yeah, mostly I make a lot of content about BPD, my addictions, addiction recovery. I talk a lot about sobriety, things like that, my experiences with it, along with bipolar too, and all my other diagnoses, along with my experience as a queer person and as a non-binary person. Yeah, anything is DamagedxDolly. Other than that, I have not much to promote.
Yeah. Okay, so really, I'm just gonna stop recording for now. But like, thank you guys really so much for coming.